The great hall of Nexus Prime buzzed with fear and despair as alien delegates filled every seat in the massive chamber. Speaker Veltar stood at the center podium, his blue skin darker than usual from stress. The Aquilan leader had called this emergency meeting because the news from the Outer Rim was worse than anyone imagined. 3 more star systems had fallen to the Zephyrian Empire in just 1 week. The Botanical Collective had lost their beautiful garden worlds where crystal trees sang in harmony with the wind. The crystalline hierarchy watched helplessly as their mining colonies were stripped bare and their people enslaved. Even the mighty Vorthan Republic, with their powerful energy weapons, could not stop the Zephyrian advance. Kane Morrison sat quietly in the small human section near the back of the hall. He was young for a diplomat at only 32 years old, and his brown hair was already showing gray streaks from the stress of representing humanity in this vast galactic community. Humans had only joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago when their ships finally developed faster than light travel. Most aliens still saw them as primitive newcomers with only 3 small star systems to their name. The Zephyrian Empire had been at war with the galaxy for 3 long years now. Their massive black ships appeared without warning and destroyed everything in their path. No one knew where they came from or why they wanted to conquer every living world they found. What everyone did know was that they were winning Ambassador Kethra from the ethereal realm floated above her seat as she spoke in her musical voice about the latest defeat. Her people were made of pure energy and had fought wars for over 10,000 years, but even they could not find a way to stop the Zephyrians. The enemy ships had shields that blocked every type of weapon the galaxy possessed, and their own weapons could destroy entire fleets with single shots. The Vorthon delegate slammed his massive fist on his desk, making the entire section shake. His people were warriors who had never lost a battle until the Zephyrians came. Now half their worlds were gone, and their greatest generals were dead. The rage in his 4 eyes burned bright enough for everyone to see. Speaker Veltar tried to maintain order, but panic was spreading through the chamber like wildfire. The insectoid swarm's representative clicked and buzzed frantically as she reported that 3 of their hive worlds had gone silent. The Silicon Brotherhood's ambassador projected holographic images of their destroyed cities, while his mechanical voice described the slaughter in cold detail. Kane listened to report after report of defeat and destruction. Every species in the galaxy was losing this war. The combined fleets of 12 ancient civilizations could not stop one enemy. Traditional battle tactics that had worked for millions of years were useless against Zephyrian technology and strategy. The Aquilan speaker called for new ideas, but the chamber fell silent. What could be said that had not been tried already? Energy. Weapons failed against their shields. Kinetic weapons were too slow to hit their fast ships. Even the most advanced computer viruses could not penetrate their networks. Every military strategy known to galactic civilization had been attempted and failed. In the back corner, a small voice spoke up. Kane Morrison had raised his hand and was standing in the human section. The alien delegates barely noticed him at first. Humans were so new to space travel that most species forgot they even existed. Their technology was laughably primitive by galactic standards, with chemical rockets and metal projectiles instead of proper energy weapons. Speaker Veltar noticed the human delegate and nodded for him to speak. Kane walked slowly to the center of the hall, feeling thousands of alien eyes watching him. Some delegates whispered among themselves, wondering what the primitive humans could possibly contribute to this discussion. Others ignored him completely and continued their own conversations about evacuation plans. Kane reached the speaking platform and looked out at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. These beings had existed among the stars for thousands or even millions of years before humans learned to make fire. Their technology was so advanced it seemed like magic to human scientists. Their cultures were rich with history and wisdom accumulated over eons of existence. But they were all losing this war. Kane cleared his throat and spoke in a clear voice that carried throughout the chamber. He announced that he had been given permission by the government of Earth to make an official statement regarding humanity's position on the current galactic conflict. The chamber slowly grew quiet as delegates realized the human was making some kind of formal declaration. The young diplomat reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed document bearing the official seals of Earth's united government. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the paper while every being in the chamber watched with growing curiosity. What could the newest and weakest member of the Galactic Council possibly have to say about a war that was destroying ancient civilizations? Kane looked up from the document and spoke words that would change the galaxy forever. He announced that after careful consideration of all available intelligence and strategic analysis, humanity had made its decision about joining the war against the Zephyrian Empire. The chamber held its breath waiting for the inevitable declaration that humans would evacuate their small colonies and flee to some distant corner of the galaxy like so many other species had already done. No one expected what came next. 3 days before Kane Morrison would shock the Galactic Council, President Lisa Warren sat behind her desk in the Oval Office, staring at intelligence reports that painted a grim picture of the galaxy. The morning sun streamed through the windows, but the mood in the room was as dark as a moonless night. Around the large table sat the most important people in human government and military leadership. General Patricia Collins spread out holographic displays showing the Zephyrian advance across known space. The red markers indicating conquered worlds formed an ugly scar across the galactic map that grew larger every day. Her weathered face showed the strain of watching an entire civilization prepare for extinction. She had fought in wars before, but nothing like this. Director Ryan Clark of the Galactic Affairs Department pulled up communication logs from human ambassadors stationed throughout the galaxy. Every report told the same story. Refugee fleets fled from world after world, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs. Ancient civilizations that had survived for millions of years were being wiped out in weeks. Admiral Grace Murphy studied tactical reports from the latest battles with professional interest. The Zephyrian ships moved in perfect formations and attacked with mathematical precision. Their energy shields deflected every weapon the galaxy could throw at them, while their own plasma cannons destroyed enemy vessels with single shots. It was like watching knights in armor fight against children with sticks. Dr. Nathan Torres adjusted his glasses and pointed to technical specifications displayed on his tablet. 2 years ago, a human survey ship had discovered wreckage from a Zephyrian vessel at the edge of human space. The ship appeared to have been damaged in some kind of accident and abandoned by its crew. Human scientists had been studying every piece of that wreckage ever since. The research had revealed fascinating details about Zephyrian technology, and more importantly, their tactics. The aliens fought according to strict patterns that had been perfected over thousands of years of conquest. They expected their enemies to engage in formal fleet battles with honor and dignity. Every species they had encountered followed the same basic rules of warfare. President Warren listened carefully as her advisors explained what made the Zephyrians so dangerous. Their shields were designed to stop energy weapons and fast-moving projectiles. Their tactics assumed enemies would protect civilian populations and avoid targeting non-military infrastructure. Most critically, they had never faced an opponent. Willing to break the accepted rules of civilized warfare, General Collins leaned forward and activated a classified presentation that only a handful of humans had ever seen. Operation Wildcard was the most ambitious military plan in human history. It required throwing away every assumption about how space wars should be fought and embracing tactics that would horrify most galactic civilizations. The plan called for targeting Zephyrian supply lines instead of their fleets. Human forces would strike communication centers and civilian infrastructure that supported military operations. Most shocking of all, the operation included provisions for using nuclear weapons in space combat, something that was considered barbaric by galactic standards. Admiral Murphy explained how human ships could be modified to carry weapons that no alien military would ever consider using. Chemical explosives could be launched from traditional missiles to create debris fields that would damage Zephyrian hulls. Electronic warfare systems could jam their communications with simple radio interference. Even primitive kinetic weapons might penetrate shields designed to stop exotic energy beams. Dr. Torres revealed the most important discovery from studying the wreckage. Zephyrian computer systems were incredibly advanced, but they were also predictable. Human hackers had found ways to exploit weaknesses that no alien civilization would think to look for because they followed the same basic design principles as everyone else. The room fell silent as President Warren considered the implications of what her advisors were telling her. Humanity could potentially win this war, but only by fighting in ways that would make them enemies of every civilized species in the galaxy. The tactics required would violate every treaty and convention that governed interstellar conflict. Director Clark brought up another crucial point. If humans revealed their willingness to use such methods, other species might decide that humanity was just as dangerous as the Zephyrians. Earth could find itself facing a second war against former allies who feared what monsters they had unleashed. General Collins argued that moral considerations were meaningless if the galaxy was destroyed. The Zephyrians had already proven they would exterminate every living being they encountered. Traditional warfare had failed completely. Someone had to be willing to do whatever was necessary to stop them, even if it meant becoming the villains of galactic history. Admiral Murphy added that human forces were small enough to be overlooked by most alien militaries. They could implement new tactics before anyone realized what was happening. Once the effectiveness was proven, other species might be willing to adopt human methods regardless of how distasteful they found them. Dr. Torres pointed out that humans had one advantage no other species possessed. Earth had a long history of brutal warfare between different human nations. Every tactic that worked against the Zephyrians had been tested in human conflicts over thousands of years. Aliens who had known only ritualized combat between civilized species had no experience with total war. President Warren stood and walked to the window overlooking the gardens outside. Somewhere among the stars, entire worlds were dying, while their defenders fought according to rules that guaranteed their defeat. She thought about her children and grandchildren who would inherit whatever remained of human civilization after this war ended. The decision she made in that moment would determine whether humanity survived as a species or died along with the rest of galactic civilization. More importantly, it would decide what kind of species humanity would become. They could maintain their moral principles and face extinction with dignity, or they could embrace the darkness of total war and possibly save everyone. President Warren turned back to face her advisors and spoke the words that would change everything. She authorized Operation Wildcard and ordered Kane Morrison to make the declaration that would shock the galaxy. Humanity would not just join this war, they would lead it using methods that no civilized species would ever consider. The meeting ended with orders being sent to military commanders across human space. Within hours, the most primitive member of the Galactic Council would become its most dangerous ally. Kane Morrison looked out at the assembled delegates of the Galactic Council and spoke words that no one expected to hear. Humanity would not only join the war against the Zephyrian Empire, but would take complete command of all military operations. The chamber erupted in chaos as thousands of alien voices rose in shock, anger, and disbelief. The Vorthan delegate stood up so quickly that his chair fell backward with a crash. His forearms waved wildly as he shouted that humans were barely capable of reaching their own moon 50 years ago. How dare these primitive newcomers suggest they could lead civilizations that had mastered space travel before Earth even existed? Ambassador Kethra from the ethereal realm flickered with angry colors as her energy form pulsed brighter. She pointed out that human ships still used chemical rockets and metal bullets, while the rest of the galaxy had moved beyond such crude technology millions of years ago. The very idea that humans could succeed where advanced species had failed was insulting. Kane waited patiently for the noise to die down before continuing with his presentation. He activated a holographic display that showed detailed analysis of every major battle fought against the Zephyrians over the past 3 years. The patterns were clear to anyone willing to look objectively at the data. Every species had fought the Zephyrians exactly the same way. Fleet met fleet in open space, with energy weapons blazing until one side was destroyed. Honor demanded that civilian targets be avoided and non-combatants be protected. Military installations were attacked with formal declarations and advance warnings. Combat followed rules that had governed interstellar warfare for millions of years. The problem was that the Zephyrians had mastered these rules better than anyone else. Their shields were designed specifically to stop energy weapons. Their tactics assumed enemies would engage in honorable combat. They had conquered dozens of species by being better at traditional warfare than their opponents. Kane pointed to intelligence gathered from captured Zephyrian communications and salvaged ship components. The enemy expected their opponents to fight with dignity and follow established protocols. They had detailed studies of every major galactic military doctrine and had developed counters for all of them, but they had never encountered humanity, the Yafur. Young Diplomat began explaining what made human warfare different from anything the galaxy had ever seen. On Earth, nations had fought total wars where every resource and every person became part of the conflict. Humans had developed concepts like asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, and unconventional tactics that no alien civilization would consider honorable. The crystalline hierarchy's representative interrupted with a harsh, grinding sound that passed for laughter among his people. He demanded to know what possible advantage primitive human weapons could have against Zephyrian technology. Their particle beam weapons could destroy human ships before chemical rockets could even reach their targets. Kane smiled and activated another display showing technical specifications that made several delegates gasp in surprise. Human scientists had been studying captured Zephyrian technology and had made fascinating discoveries. The enemy shields that stopped energy weapons so effectively were not designed to handle certain types of kinetic impacts. More importantly, Zephyrian computer systems, while incredibly advanced, were vulnerable to electronic warfare techniques that humans had developed during their own conflicts. Simple radio jamming could disrupt their communications. Computer viruses designed according to human logic could penetrate their networks because no alien hacker would think to try such crude methods. The chamber grew quieter as delegates began to understand what the human was suggesting. Kane continued his presentation by outlining specific tactical modifications that could be implemented immediately. Human ships could be equipped with nuclear weapons that would create electromagnetic pulses capable of disabling Zephyrian electronics alien. Vessels could be fitted with kinetic projectile weapons that would punch through shields designed to stop energy beams. Most importantly, all forces could be retrained to use human military doctrine that emphasized speed surprise and the willingness to target any asset that supported enemy operations. Ambassador Sylvan from the Botanical Collective asked the question. That was on everyone's mind. What gave humans the right to demand command of galactic military forces? Her people had been fighting wars since before human ancestors crawled out of Earth's oceans. Kane's response was simple and devastating. He pointed to the tactical displays showing 3 years of continuous defeats and asked what right anyone had to continue using failed strategies. Every day that traditional tactics were employed, more worlds died and more species faced extinction. The human delegation had come prepared with detailed intelligence that no other species possessed. Earth's hackers had penetrated Zephyrian communication networks and discovered crucial information about enemy fleet movements and strategic objectives. This intelligence could only be exploited using human tactical doctrine. Director Ryan Clark appeared on the Chamber's communication system broadcasting from Earth. He formally offered to share all human military technology and intelligence with any species willing to accept human command structure. The alternative was to continue losing until no one was left to fight. The ethereal ambassador asked what guarantee the galaxy had that humans would not simply become new conquerors once the Zephyrians were defeated. Kane looked directly at her, energy form, and spoke with complete honesty. There was no guarantee except humanity's word that they wanted to save galactic civilization, not rule it. He pointed out that humans were still too weak to threaten anyone, even with their unconventional tactics. Earth needed the galaxy's advanced technology just as much as the galaxy needed human military innovation. The partnership would benefit everyone if they could survive long enough to implement it. As the debate continued, urgent reports arrived. From the outer rim, the Zephyrian advance had accelerated, and 3 more systems had fallen in the past 12 hours. Refugee fleets were streaming toward the galactic core, carrying millions of survivors who had lost everything. Speaker Veltar called for an immediate vote on the human proposal. The Aquilan leader had watched his people's colonies burn while traditional military doctrine failed to stop the enemy advance. He was willing to try anything that might save what remained of galactic civilization. One by one, the delegates cast their votes. Some species chose to maintain their dignity and fight according to ancient traditions. Others decided that survival was more important than honor. When the final count was announced, humanity had been granted limited command authority over volunteer forces. Kane Morrison had accomplished something that no one thought possible. The youngest species in the galaxy would now lead the fight against its greatest enemy. Whether this decision would save civilization or damn it remained to be seen, but at least now there was hope where before there had been only despair. The die was cast and the galaxy would soon learn what human warfare really meant. 6 weeks after the Galactic Council vote, Admiral Grace Murphy stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, watching her mixed fleet prepare for humanity's first major operation against the Zephyrians. The converted human carrier led a force of 30 ships, including vessels from 7 different alien species, all retrofitted with human weapons and tactical systems. The target was Kepler 7, a recently conquered world where the Zephyrians had established a major staging base for their next wave of attacks. Traditional galactic doctrine would call for a direct assault on the enemy fortress, followed by months of siege warfare. Admiral Murphy had very different plans. Captain Jake Phillips commanded the first wave from his modified destroyer UNS Tornado. His ship looked nothing like the sleek vessel that had left Earth's shipyards 6 months ago. Human engineers had stripped away the elegant curves and replaced them with angular armor plating and weapon pods that could launch everything from nuclear missiles to simple kinetic slugs. The alien ships in the fleet had undergone even more dramatic changes. The Vorthan cruiser Thunder of Storms now carried human missile launchers alongside its traditional energy weapons. The crystalline hierarchy's geometric vessel Faceted Dawn had been equipped with electronic warfare systems that could jam enemy communications across multiple frequency bands. Admiral Murphy activated the fleet communication system and addressed her mixed crew of humans and aliens. She explained that they would not be fighting like civilized species had fought for millions of years. Today, they would show the galaxy what human warfare looked like when unleashed against an enemy that threatened all life. The operation began not with a glorious charge toward the enemy fortress, but with Major Christine Baker leading her Special Forces team through the asteroid field surrounding Kepler 7. Her soldiers moved like ghosts through space using modified armor that masked their heat signatures from Zephyrian sensors. While the enemy watched their sensors for incoming fleets, Baker's team landed on 3 different mining platforms that supplied raw materials to the Zephyrian base. Instead of announcing their presence with energy weapons, the humans used simple chemical explosives to destroy refining equipment and storage facilities. The Zephyrians responded exactly as human intelligence had predicted. They sent patrol ships to investigate the explosions while keeping their main fleet in defensive formation around the planet. The enemy commanders assumed they were facing the opening moves of a traditional siege and prepared for the long bombardment that always preceded ground assault. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Johnson activated his psychological warfare suite from aboard the intelligence ship UNS Phantom. Human hackers had spent weeks infiltrating Zephyrian communication networks using viruses that alien cybersecurity would never expect. Simple code based on human logic patterns slipped past defenses designed to stop sophisticated alien programs. Within minutes, Johnson's team was broadcasting false orders across Zephyrian military frequencies. Patrol squadrons received contradictory commands that sent them racing to defend empty space while leaving vital supply routes unguarded. The rigid enemy command structure began to crack under the confusion of conflicting information. Captain Phillips led his destroyer squadron in the next phase of the attack. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet directly, his ships launched clouds of simple metal projectiles at key infrastructure targets. The kinetic weapons moved too slowly to threaten Zephyrian ships, but they were perfect for destroying unshielded communication arrays and sensor stations. The enemy fortress tried to respond with its massive plasma cannons, but found itself shooting at shadows. Human ships used electronic countermeasures to appear on sensors in multiple locations at once, while their real positions remained hidden behind clouds of metallic chaff that confused targeting systems. Admiral Murphy watched the tactical display with satisfaction as the Zephyrian defense began to collapse. The enemy had prepared for honorable combat between fleets, but found themselves fighting an invisible enemy that struck at everything except their military vessels. Supply lines, communication networks, and support infrastructure fell to weapons that cost almost nothing to produce. Major Baker's ground teams had infiltrated the planet's surface using drop pods that looked like debris from destroyed ships. While Zephyrian forces searched for the main human landing force, Baker's soldiers were already inside the enemy base using maintenance tunnels that no alien would think to guard. The assault on the command center came from 3 directions simultaneously. Baker's team struck from underground, while human Marines landed directly on the fortress roof, using chemical rockets that produced no energy signature. At the same time, modified alien soldiers created a diversion at the main gate using traditional weapons. Commander Victoria Wells coordinated the multiple attacks from her position aboard the electronic warfare vessel UNS Silent Storm. Her teams jammed Zephyrian communications while feeding false sensor data that made the human forces appear 10 times larger than their actual numbers. The enemy commanders could not tell which attacks were real and which were decoys. The breakthrough came when human hackers gained access to the Zephyrian computer core using passwords stolen from captured personnel. Instead of trying to destroy the system, they simply changed the access codes and locked out the enemy operators. The fortress weapons fell silent as their crews found themselves unable to control their own equipment. Captain Phillips led the final assault with his destroyer squadron, launching everything from nuclear warheads to simple explosive shells at the now defenseless enemy positions. The Zephyrian shields flickered and failed under the barrage of mixed weapon types that their systems were never designed to handle. When the fortress finally fell 18 hours after the attack began, the galaxy received its first proof that human tactics could work against Zephyrian technology. The enemy base that should have taken months to capture had been destroyed in less than a day. Using weapons that most aliens considered primitive, Admiral Murphy stood among the ruins of the enemy command center, watching her mixed crews of humans and aliens celebrate their victory. The Zephyrians, who had seemed unstoppable just yesterday, now lay defeated by an enemy they had never bothered to study. News of the victory spread through galactic communication networks faster than the speed of light. Species that had refused to work with humans began sending messages asking for tactical consultation. Military leaders who had dismissed human doctrine as barbaric now wanted to learn everything about asymmetric warfare. The tide of the war had not yet turned, but for the first time in 3 years there was real hope that the Zephyrian Empire could be defeated. All it took was someone willing to fight without honor to save honor itself. News of humanity's victory at Kepler 7 spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and everything changed overnight. Species that had previously refused to work with humans now flooded Admiral Murphy's headquarters with requests to join the combined Galactic Defense Force. The communication arrays on Nexus Prime overloaded as military leaders from dozens of worlds begged for integration into human command structure. Colonel Amy Foster found herself running the largest military academy in Galactic history as alien officers arrived by the thousands to learn human tactical doctrine. The cultural shock was immense, as species that had fought the same way for millions of years tried to understand concepts that went against everything they believed about honorable warfare. The ethereal realm's greatest generals who existed as pure energy and had never known physical death struggled to comprehend the human concept of acceptable losses. The Vorthan warriors, whose culture was built around single combat between champions, could not grasp the idea of attacking supply lines instead of enemy fighters. The Botanical Collective's living ship crews found human psychological warfare tactics morally disturbing, but they learned because the alternative was extinction. Foster worked 18-hour days teaching alien minds to think like human soldiers. She explained how Earth's military academies had studied thousands of years of warfare between human nations and had distilled the most effective tactics into doctrine that could be adapted for space combat. Every lesson was written in the blood of human conflicts that aliens found horrifying. The Zephyrian response came swiftly and brutally. Emperor Zekvar himself took personal command of their forces for the first time in the war. Intelligence reports described him as a being of terrible intelligence who had conquered more worlds than any creature in galactic history. Now he turned his full attention toward destroying the human threat before it could spread. The Emperor assembled the largest Zephyrian fleet ever seen and launched it directly toward human space. His strategy was simple and effective. Destroy Earth and the human command structure would collapse, taking their dangerous new tactics with it. Without human leadership, the galaxy would return to fighting wars the traditional way that Zephyrians. Always One Admiral Murphy knew the attack was coming long before Zephyrian ships appeared on long-range sensors. Human intelligence networks had infiltrated enemy communications so completely that she often knew about Zephyrian orders before some of their own commanders did. The challenge was not detecting the threat, but surviving it. The Battle of the Terminus sector became the largest space engagement in recorded galactic history. Emperor Zekvar brought over 300 ships, including fortress vessels the size of small moons armed with weapons that could destroy planets. Against this armada, Admiral Murphy could field only 90 ships from 12 different species, unified under human tactical command. Captain Drew Hamilton led the opening phase from his stealth frigate, UNS Ghost Rider. His squadron had been modified, with crystalline hierarchy, cloaking technology, and human electronic warfare systems that made them nearly invisible to enemy sensors. They slipped through the Zephyrian formation, like shadows delivering nuclear mines to key positions before vanishing again. The Emperor's fleet discovered the mines only when they began exploding in carefully coordinated patterns that created debris, fields throughout their formation. Suddenly, the mighty Zephyrian ships found themselves trying to navigate through clouds of radioactive metal while human forces struck from unexpected angles. Commander Victoria Wells orchestrated the electronic warfare campaign from her position aboard the command ship UNS Victory. Her teams had spent months studying captured Zephyrian communication protocols and had learned to perfectly mimic enemy transmissions. False orders flooded enemy networks, directing ships to wrong coordinates and scrambling their careful formations, the FA. Zephyrians tried to respond with their traditional tactics, but found themselves fighting ghosts. Human ships appeared on sensors in multiple locations simultaneously, while their real positions remained hidden behind electronic countermeasures that no alien military had ever developed. Energy weapons fired at empty space, while kinetic projectiles struck unshielded targets. Colonel Foster's training paid off as alien crews implemented human doctrine with devastating effectiveness. Vorthan warriors who had spent lifetimes learning honorable single combat now struck from ambush using weapons, their culture considered cowardly. Ethereal commanders who had never retreated from battle learned the human art of strategic withdrawal that left enemy forces overextended and vulnerable. The turning point came when Captain Phillips led a desperate assault directly at the Emperor's flagship. His destroyer squadron launched everything they had at the massive vessel while broadcasting false retreat signals that convinced other Zephyrian ships to pursue phantoms instead of defending their leader Emperor. Zekvar found himself isolated in the center of a debris field with human forces closing in from all directions. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he was forced to call for retreat. The Zephyrian fleet that had never lost a major engagement fled the battlefield, leaving behind dozens of destroyed ships and their reputation for invincibility. Admiral Murphy stood on the bridge of UNS Victory, watching enemy vessels disappear into hyperspace, while damage reports flooded in from her own fleet. Human casualties were heavy, but for the first time in the war, Zephyrian losses exceeded those of the defending forces. More importantly, the galaxy had seen that their seemingly unstoppable enemy could be beaten. The psychological impact of the victory was even greater than the military results. Species throughout the galaxy realized that the tide of war had genuinely turned. Zephyrian commanders who had grown overconfident from 3 years of easy victories now faced an enemy that fought in ways they could not predict or counter-recruitment. For the combined Galactic Defense Force increased dramatically as entire species committed their remaining military assets to human command. The war was far from over. But now there was real hope that galactic civilization could survive the Zephyrian onslaught. Emperor Zekvar retreated to his core systems to regroup and plan his response to this new threat. For the first time in his reign of terror, he faced an enemy that refused to fight by the rules that had guaranteed his success. The humans had brought something to the galaxy that the Zephyrians had never encountered before. Total war was coming to a civilization that had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival itself. 1 year after Kane Morrison's declaration that shocked the Galactic Council, the combined fleet of human and alien forces gathered at the edge of the Zephyr system for the final assault. The empire that had once seemed unstoppable was now reduced to its home worlds, surrounded by the wreckage of fleets that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 years. Admiral Murphy stood on the bridge of her flagship UNS Triumph looking at tactical displays that showed the fruits of human military doctrine applied on a galactic scale. The Zephyrian Empire had been pushed back system by system as their rigid tactics proved useless against enemies who refused to fight fair. Supply lines had been severed, communication networks destroyed, and entire fleets isolated and eliminated piecemeal. The final battle began not with the grand fleet engagement that traditional warfare would demand, but with a carefully coordinated campaign of psychological operations that had been running for months. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson's specialists had infiltrated Zephyrian civilian networks and filled them with broadcasts showing the true cost of their empire's expansion. For the first time in their history, ordinary Zephyrians learned what their military had done to conquered worlds. Images of destroyed cities and enslaved populations flooded their communication systems, along with messages explaining that surrender would bring mercy, while resistance would bring the full fury of human warfare. The effect on enemy morale was devastating. Emperor Zekvar tried to rally his remaining forces from his fortress on Zephyr Prime, but found his own people turning against him. Human intelligence operations had revealed documents proving that the Emperor was willing to sacrifice entire planets to maintain his power. Zephyrian civilians who had believed they were part of a glorious crusade discovered they were simply tools for one being's megalomania. The space battle above Zephyr Prime showcased everything that humanity had taught the galaxy about warfare. Captain Hamilton's stealth squadrons disabled planetary defense networks using electronic warfare, while alien vessels modified with human weapons struck from angles that enemy shields could not protect. Nuclear weapons created electromagnetic pulses that blinded enemy sensors, while kinetic projectiles punched through barriers designed to stop energy beams. Major Baker led the ground assault with a mixed force of human marines and alien soldiers, who had learned to fight like humans. Instead of the honorable siege that Zephyrian doctrine expected, the attackers struck at civilian infrastructure that supported military operations. Power plants, communication centers, and transportation networks fell to coordinated attacks that left enemy forces isolated and confused. Commander Wells coordinated the final assault from her electronic warfare station, jamming enemy communications, while broadcasting surrender terms directly to Zephyrian military units. Many enemy commanders chose to lay down their arms rather than face the human way of war that had destroyed every force sent against it. The breakthrough came when human hackers gained control of the planetary defense grid using viruses that had been planted months earlier. Instead of destroying the weapons, they simply turned them against Zephyrian positions while broadcasting messages that blamed the Emperor for bringing destruction to his own homeworld. Emperor Zekvar made his last stand in the Imperial Palace, surrounded by the few guards who remained loyal to him. When human forces finally breached the throne room, they found a broken being who could not understand how primitive creatures had defeated an empire that had conquered thousands of worlds. Admiral Murphy faced the Emperor in person for the first time as he demanded to know how humans had accomplished what ancient civilizations could not. The Admiral's response became legendary throughout the galaxy as she explained that Zephyrians had been fighting wars the way everyone else fought them. The Emperor had mastered galactic warfare, but humans had brought Earth warfare to the stars. Every tactic that defeated his forces had been tested in conflicts between human nations over thousands of years. The galaxy had rules for civilized combat, but Earth had learned to fight for survival itself. The formal surrender ceremony took place in the ruins of the Imperial Palace, with representatives from every species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule. Kane Morrison, who had started it all with his shocking declaration, now accepted the unconditional surrender of an empire on behalf of galactic civilization. But victory came with a terrible price that went beyond the millions who had died. In the war, the galaxy had learned what humans were capable of when they chose to abandon the rules of civilized warfare. Some species celebrated their liberation, while others quietly began making plans to defend themselves against their new protectors. The Ethereal Realm's ambassador privately expressed concern that humanity had demonstrated a willingness to use any means necessary to achieve their goals. The Vorthon Republic wondered if their warrior culture could survive in a galaxy where honor was less important than effectiveness. Even allies who had fought alongside human forces questioned what monsters they had unleashed. Ambassador Morrison addressed these concerns in his final speech to the reformed Galactic Council. He acknowledged that human tactics had been brutal by galactic standards, but pointed out that they had saved civilizations that would otherwise have been destroyed. Sometimes preserving civilization required abandoning civilized rules of engagement. The establishment of the Human Military Academy on Nexus Prime became the symbol of how the galaxy had changed. Alien officers came to learn the art of war from the species that had turned conflict into science. The curriculum included everything from asymmetric warfare to psychological operations to the ethics of total war. Students learned that humans had fought wars against their own species for most of their history and had developed tactics that prioritized victory over honor. These methods were offered freely to any species willing to learn them, but came with a warning about their true cost. Kane Morrison stood before the first graduating class of alien officers and explained what humanity had brought to the galaxy. Earth's children had proven that sometimes the newest voice had the oldest solutions, and that survival often required embracing the very darkness that civilization sought to overcome. The galaxy was finally safe from the Zephyrian threat, but it would never be the same. Humanity had saved galactic civilization by showing them how to fight wars that could not be won through honor alone. Whether this knowledge would ultimately prove to be salvation or damnation remained to be seen. In the end, the price of victory was the loss of innocence for an entire galaxy that learned what it meant to fight not just for conquest or glory, but for the right to exist at all. The humans had given them the tools to survive, but had also shown them what they could become if survival demanded it. The war was over, but the questions it raised about the nature of civilization and the cost of peace would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.